Namaste to all of you. I welcome everyone to this the sixth session of this webinar. On behalf of the Center for Indic Studies, Indus University, Ahmedabad, and the Gandhi Research Foundation, Jalgaon, I welcome all of you to this webathon, which is spread over 1 year to celebrate the birth centenary of Sri Dharampalji, whose dates are 1922 to 2006. This event is being organized in collaboration with various institutions, including the IGNCA, the ICHR, ICSSR, and the ICPR. Today is the sixth in a series of monthly webinars that began in July and that is running through the course of 1 year. Each of these monthly webinars are centered on various important works authored by Sri Dharampalji. The topic for today's webinar is how to make the national education policy viable for our youth in tomorrow's world. This session is inspired by Dharampalji's initiative to work on India's education and his book, The Beautiful Tree, especially. And to speak on this, we have today with us Professor Michel Danino and Dr. Sahana Singh. And I now invite Professor Geeta Dharampalji, who is the daughter of Sri Dharampal, to introduce our esteemed panelists for this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ankur. And it's a privilege for me to say a few introductory words. Firstly, a most cordial welcome to all of you, to our eminent speakers, and to all members of our audience. Today, we are focusing on a crucially central topic for our society. As Ankur has just mentioned, the title is How to Make the National Education Policy Viable for Our Youth in Tomorrow's World. And this is in continuation of our last month's session when we discussed in detail the way in which locally funded educational institutions, catering especially to the lower strata of society, were still functioning remarkably well until the early 19th century in many parts of India, as documented in Dharampalji's iconic volume, The Beautiful Tree. But besides authoring this well-known and well-received publication, Dharampalji also reflected deeply about the status of education in post-independent India and endeavored to indicate how it could be improved. These reflections were articulated in public speeches, in articles, some of which were widely circulated. So 15 years after his demise, I'm sure he would have welcomed the new educational policy and would most probably have had much to contribute in the ongoing debate, which is deliberating on, for instance, how can we learn from our dynamic and democratic indigenous educational traditions? Are Indian knowledge systems still relevant for the 21st century? How can our primary education be structured more appropriately to cater to the needs of India's diverse population? Today, these and other crucial issues will be discussed in depth by our two eminent speakers, Professor Michel Danino and Srimati Sahana Singh, in dialogic interaction with Dr. Ram Sharma, Director of the Center for Indic Studies, and Dr. Ankur Kakkar, who is the Assistant Professor at the same center, respectively. We are privileged today to have this unique opportunity of interacting with such well-informed and knowledgeable speakers, and both have appreciated and been influenced in their own work by Dharampalji's contribution. Now, just a few words about each of them. Professor Michel Danino is an accomplished scholar of Sanskrit and Indian knowledge systems. In fact, he may have coined this term. Although of French origin, he has made India his karma bhumi. Indeed, for his substantial contributions, he has been honored with the Padma Shri. But what is most relevant and helpful for us today is his being an advisory member of the NEP, or the National Education Policy. Therefore, he is the ideal speaker for our today's session. Likewise is the case for our second speaker, Srimati Sahana Singh, who is formerly an environmental engineer by qualification, but who writes on a variety of issues, including Indian history, water management, and education. Her first book, The Educational Heritage of Ancient India, How an Ecosystem of Learning Was Laid to Waste, has been appreciated for awakening Indians to the role played by India in spreading knowledge around the world. Her second book, entitled Revisiting the Educational Heritage of India, published by Vitasta, has just been released 2 months ago in September 2021. The book explores in greater depth the subject of India's unique ecosystem of learning, which created a knowledge-centered society and laid the foundation for major academic disciplines. An alumnus of Delhi Technological University, Sahana had made a career shift to writing after moving to Singapore, but I think now she's based in Texas. That's probably correct. She worked as editor of Asian Water magazine for many years. Sahana has won several awards for journalism, including the Developing Asia Journalism Award in 2008. Her articles have been published in Reader's Digest, Washington Post, Discovery Channel, Asia, Asian Water magazine, Swaraj, Indian Facts, and other publications. And she has moderated panel discussions at several international conferences. She's on the board of many nonprofit organizations related to history, heritage, education, restoration of samskara, and she is above all passionate about connecting the dots across different societies, civilizations, and disciplines. This is a little more detail about Sahana Singh, because I think Dr. Ram Sharma will be introducing our first speaker, Professor Michel Danino. And with such erudite speakers, we certainly look forward to a stimulating session this afternoon. And with these brief introductory words, let me now request Dr. Ram Sharma, Director of the Center for Indic Studies, to initiate the first part of today's session, epitomized by our first speaker, Professor Michel Danino. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geeta ji. It is indeed an honor and pleasure to welcome Michel ji. I think, Michel ji is someone who is the fountainhead of whatever activities we are doing at Center for Indic Studies related to Indian knowledge system. And on personal front or through, institutional perspective, I think all those who are working for Indian knowledge system revival today, they look forward for guidance from encyclopedic Michel ji, because whenever you approach him, he knows about everything related to Indian knowledge system. So, of course, it is quite impossible for me to introduce and to give, proper introduction of Michel ji, because he's been so actively involved in areas related to, restoring India's knowledge system. But of course, there are two things which became milestone for us also, or turning point, I should say, for us. First, when we came across, two books, which I think Michel ji introduced in 2013 or 14, in CBSE, Knowledge and Tradition Practices of India. And first time we came to know that how to introduce indigenous knowledge system of India systematically in mainstream education. And then later on, he started, introducing systematic module on Indian knowledge system and IIT Gandhinagar. And there we got to learn a lot that because what we have been looking for, for many years or maybe 2 decades now, that, what could be the execution method of introducing, Indian knowledge system in mainstream academia. And that set the tone for us also. And Center for Indic Studies, since 2015, when we started this, I think inspired by, 3 categories of, influential thinkers of last century. As I mentioned in my inaugural speech of this year-long webathon also, the first one were, Voice of India, founder Sita Ramji and Ram Sarupji. Second one was, of course, Dharampalji. Okay. And third one was Kapil Kapoorji and Michel Danino, because they pioneered this approach. Of course, I think if I'm not wrong, Kapil Kapoorji coined this term Indian knowledge system and gave us vision that how to bring Indian knowledge system to mainstream academia. So, of course, I can go on and on about my interaction with Michel ji, because I have been disturbing him a lot with, a specific request on how to take this ahead. But we have very limited time, and I would directly like to, jump to the topic and would like to ask few fundamental questions related to national education policy as well as related to Indian knowledge system. For those who might not be coming from this background of, why IKS and what's, NEP and the importance of NEP. Michel ji, I would like to first know from you, those who would like to understand national education policy, they would like to know, first of all, that what's wrong with our current education system. Because without having proper stock taking of what's wrong with, status quo today, it will be difficult to understand what changes we would like to bring to our education system. So can you please help us in understanding what's wrong with current India's education system?
Namaste. Thank you, Ramji. Thank you, Geeta ji, Sahana ji. And I'm not going to respond to all your over-generous introductions. Let me also, in the interest of time, try to address this question. And you're right, it is the first question we should ask, except that it might be much shorter to ask what is right with the present Indian education system. I think we would save a lot of time, because there is not much that we can find that is really right, really right. You see, it's become perverted in the course of decades into basically a skill training for jobs. Even that skill training is not very good, and you have constant, potential future employers in the industry who complain that Indian students are not often employable. So there's something deeply wrong, and I think we have simply taken easy solutions of mechanizing the whole education, making it textbook centric. The teacher doesn't have much autonomy and is kind of forced to stick to a particular syllabus, to stick to the textbooks, because otherwise the students will not pass. So the whole exam system, which is perhaps very largely responsible, ended up testing very mechanically whatever was learned by rote. The whole system kind of spiraled down. There are a number of other causes which we can spend time on, but it would not be very worthwhile. And you see, to the point that even mathematics, which normally should be about understanding concepts and being able to apply them to different situations, well, you find that students cannot. They will apply them only to the particular applications that they have studied. So if you shift the problem to say some different life issue, taking some problem posed by nature or by daily life, and they do not recognize the textbook, they're lost. So therefore, there is a crippling of the intellect, there is a discouragement of debate, there is a complete lack of participation of the student in his or her own education. And this has caused a lot of harm to generation of students. There are a lot of other problems with the compartmentalization, and we'll talk about this a bit later when we come to the NEP of the topics. The fact that everywhere you find that there is no real dialogue between the disciplines, and this loss of cross-disciplinary thinking is something very, very troublesome. And finally, if I want to keep it very brief, finally is the big problem of rootlessness, cultural rootlessness. The fact that the hidden message, not so hidden, but let us say the subliminal message of the Indian educational system is that all knowledge comes from the West. All useful knowledge, at least, comes from the West. And there's hardly any worthwhile Indian content except for very, very superficial snippets during the history course, usually, which will not lead very far at all. Even the so-called value education classes, which were clumsily introduced at a certain point of time, were much more a kind of moral preaching than something where obviously Indian culture should have contributed in a central way. So we've been generating, and if here I will quote my esteemed friend, Professor Kapil Kapoor, whom you very rightly mentioned, and he is the author that coined the phrase Indian knowledge systems, where he says that this system has been producing generations of students, and it continues, of course, in higher education with some small modifications, but it's basically the same problems. And these generations of students have been, at best, indifferent to the mass of India's cultural heritage, but at worst, hostile to it. And very often, and I confront this in my own teaching at IIT Gandhinagar, where I teach very bright students in an MA program. So they come sometimes from the best colleges in India for this postgraduate program, where they have a core course by me on Indian civilization. And I find that some of them come absolutely convinced that ancient India is a very dark place, where with only casteism and oppression and violence and absolutely nothing worthwhile. And it takes time to try to persuade them with mixed success, but a little bit of success perhaps at times, that, well, that's not a faithful picture. So this rootlessness is of course, a very major concern. And I ended up ironically writing some years ago, I've written many articles on the educational system, and I piloted in 2005 a project on a survey of 11,000 students across India for NCERT, where we questioned them on not only all aspects of education, but also the cultural content in Indian school education. And the results were very, very striking. It's all on my academia page if you wish to see. The reports are there, the articles are there. And I ended up at some point remarking ironically that Indian education was neither Indian nor education. So I think that's my briefest possible summary for you, Ram.
Yes, thank you, Michelji. You rightly said that it's neither Indian nor education, and perhaps we are trying to decode why you are saying this so. Okay, so let's divide this into two parts. One problem is related to factory education system sort of thing, in which you're mentioning that we do not have cross-disciplinary thing, rote learning, standardization, and all those problems. So how do you think that, this new education policy has, salient features of national education policy that you can share with us, which is particularly addressing these problems? And then maybe later on we'll come to the rootlessness part and the solutions that NEP try to offer in that.
So, yes, you see, the NEP does start from a frank acknowledgement that our system has failed. We have failed the students. We've made them unhappy. We've made them unfulfilled. We've driven, by the way, though it doesn't say that, but we've driven quite a lot of students to suicide. Let's not forget that 5,000 to 6,000 Indian students every year commit suicide. It's a huge figure. Okay, there are sometimes family issues, extraneous issues, but many of them commit suicide because of the school system, because they've been scolded by a teacher, because they've failed at an exam, or even because they're just scared that they will fail at that exam. So everything depends on the exam, everything depends on the textbook, and nothing depends on the student himself or herself. So the new education policy is trying to do justice to the student and put the student back at the center of education. It's no longer a question of passing an exam, no longer a question of course, ultimately we'll have to take the student forward, that's okay. But it's no longer a question of the rat race for jobs. And now it's a fresh look at what should be a true philosophy of education. And we always say that we have British education in India. I kind of disagree, because yes, of course, Macquarie is minute and so on and so forth, but we had 75 years to change tack and initiate new directions. And India could have been a great world leader in new education and thinking, totally failed in this exploitation of this potential. So therefore, what I mean to say is that there's a fresh look at the philosophy of how do we get a fulfilling education where the student becomes a happy person, happy to learn, and learning to learn how to learn. This key, you'll find this phrase, this phrase in the NEP, learning how to learn, and where the whole relationship between the teacher and the student totally changes, because we look now at the personality of the student and what we call, of course, the holistic development of this personality. So one key there is that, of course, the examination system needs to be deeply reformed. You cannot possibly have, again, a very, very stupid sort of exam at +2, where students are asked to have crammed, learn by heart, masses of material totally irrelevant to their future life and present life, and pretend that you're going to reform the education system. So that's one of the major keys. Another key is breaking the barriers between those disciplines and making the student understand, prompting the student through all kinds of activities, all kinds of discussions, debates, which have totally disappeared from our education system, especially at school, but also in higher education, except some better institutions, understand that everything is interconnected, everything is, works together. You cannot study the environment if you don't know aspects of how the society works, and vice versa. You cannot predict how the society is going to be 10 years ahead if you don't study the environment. Everything is, goes together, and you can extend this easily to other disciplines. So therefore, there is a very holistic perspective, but genuinely holistic. It's not just an empty slogan, where we look at the fulfillment of the student. And there are several keys there. Of course, one is the flexibility of the system. See, you've heard of how difficult it is to get a transfer from one school to another. And sometimes the school-going student loses the benefit of what has been acquired in other schools. So this system would repair that, where there would be easy migration. And also in higher education, by the way, where there would be a kind of credit bank, where you can study here, study there, it all goes to your credit bank, and that isn't lost. These innovations have actually started even a little before the NEP was formulated, some of them. So therefore, flexibility in the system, flexibility to, not because you are in a science track, you cannot take that particular language course that you would be interested in. That has to go, and according to NEP, it does go. Or because you are in an economics track, you cannot study a particular art, maybe, I don't know, Hindustani music or whatever it may be. So therefore, this barriers, among the in between the subject matters and the topics have to go or to melt away. And this is a systemic, therefore, issue. But coming back to, because I'm trying to keep it short, coming back to the central issue, which is the personality of the child, and I repeat, it has to be put right at the center. There's first of all, of course, the pedagogy. How does the teacher communicate? And right now, I can give examples of supposedly better schools in big cities I have come across in India. I won't quote the details, where the teacher comes, say, open your textbooks, page so and so, and starts writing the textbooks on the blackboard. And I've been saying for years in that case, we don't need a teacher at all. We just need tuitions, those tuition institutes and that have mushrooms across India and become a total caricature of education. They'll have to close shop if the NEP really works, as of course it will take some years. But if the NEP really works well in the end, those tuition centers will have to close shop because they will be naturally irrelevant. And it's about cramming. So therefore, the teacher will have to become now something totally different. And will have to be a kind of catalyst, a prompter of exploration and discovery. And of course, the teacher is supposed to have some knowledge, but also to have tools to guide the student through often all kinds of activities. It can also be field activities. It can be visits to sites, to museums. It can be debates. It can be use of visual material, some video here. There should be much more freedom given to the teacher to get the student to move forward. So this is one of the central keys, the reform of the exam system, the reform of the pedagogy. Lightening of the curriculum is another systemic key, because we all know that the curriculum has become enormous. We are supposedly expecting the students to swallow colossal amounts of data, most of it irrelevant, in geography, in history, and remember all of it by heart. It's a caricature of what education should be. And therefore, lightening of the curriculum, chopping out big chunks of what students right now have to learn, is one of the tasks that this National Steering Committee under Dr. Kasturi Rangan, which was recently constituted for the implementation of the NEP, where we have to frame certain curriculums for school education, higher education, also for teacher training, because the teacher has to be now totally reshaped, and finally adult education. That's what we will be trying to do. And finally, now healing that rootlessness, and therefore bringing the student back to the living roots of Indian culture in an intelligent way. We're not going to expose them to all kinds of detailed religious beliefs or things like that. No, it's about rather tapping the real living sources of what makes Indian culture still alive today. And it's not about tradition, it's not about customs, it's really about certain very central philosophical principles, and also the developments of knowledge in different areas. Because in many areas, we find that these knowledge systems still have application. Sahana ji here has worked on water management. I've also done a little bit of my own research because I integrate that in a course of mine at the IIT. And we know that people are starting to re-explore those traditional, decentralized, community-driven water management systems because they were perfectly workable, whereas our centralized, government-driven, large-scale systems are failing and are actually damaging the environment. So that's just one small example. We can go on, about agriculture, about polity, about all kinds of systems, even in physical education. There's a revival of a lot of traditional martial arts because they had ethical values built into them, like self-discipline, especially, and a lot of sense of honor, a sense of fraternity, bonding between those who share this martial art and so on. So we are rediscovering, and this is something which I'm so glad to see in the last few years in India from many institutions, groups, individuals. We are rediscovering the value, the living value of these systems, and and we have to find ways to show the student that there's great wealth of knowledge there that we can still use. So it's not about singing the glories of ancient India. I've been opposing any attempt at glorification, and I said, don't even mention that we were great, we had a great past, we are the first to do this, we're the first to do that, which sometimes is correct, sometimes is not correct also. Doesn't matter. Let us simply, let them bathe in this knowledge and soak in whatever they can, and through very practical things, the return to organic agriculture, for example, things like that. So there and ethics, we live in an increasingly unethical world, and how do we even in India, with the amount of financial frauds has been exponentially rising. How do we cure that? We need a new foundation of ethics, which will not be preaching, which will not be moralizing, which I think here India can easily provide. I teach a whole course, semester course on Indian systems of ethics in the IIT Gandhinagar, and I find tremendous response from my students. So it's not very difficult to do, again, with no glorification whatsoever. So these are some of the features. There are many others. We can't go into everything. The NEP tries very strongly to be equitable and inclusive, to be very sensitive to disadvantaged sections of the society, and some of them live in such dire situations. We've seen that during the COVID period, where the divide was even sharpened. There's issues of language, and of course there is a partial return to the mother tongue as a medium, but it's a complex issue. It will have to be done gently, because the material is not often ready in those mother tongues. There's also a distancing from textbooks. Yes, we would like to revise textbooks, but more than that, we would like textbooks to be just one of the many tools that will be available, and so that we don't become textbook centric again, and because then it becomes again the foundation for the exam system, and again for the teacher-student relation. So you can see that the task is enormous, and don't imagine that this will be done in 5 years. What has been done right now is a lot of very valuable groundwork by the Ministry of Education, especially at the school level. UGC also has tried to start really thinking hard about what initial steps can be taken to implement the NEP. The good thing is that a lot of state boards, that in India, education, after all, is much more under the control of the states than under the control of the central government. Central government does control NCRT and CBSE. However, and they kind of set important models, but ultimately education is under control of the states, and therefore they have to be on board. And the good news is that most states are collaborating. In fact, in some respects, all states are collaborating. In a few respects, like language, few states have said, no, we don't agree and we're not going to follow you. Fine, it's okay. India is diverse, we know that. We have to, initiate a process and see how it progresses. So, Ram, I've spoken a lot, probably too long, but this was what the gist of what I wanted to convey.
Yes, you have given, I think, of course, this topic is so extensive that on each area we can have discussion for many hours. And so, because this important occasion, we are celebrating Dharambalji's work in this year-long webathon. And those who are working in this field, I think Beautiful Tree was a first encounter to get a glimpse of what was India's education system, let's say 200 years or 300 years back. So when we read that, we get a different picture of India's education system. Having decentralized model, okay, and then the course curriculum was altogether different. So what do you think? Let's say those who would like to understand from Dharampalji's perspective, what features are incorporated in this national education policy, learning from Beautiful Tree specifically, which I think we would like to restore in our India's education or current academia. How far we are to achieve that goal. That Beautiful Tree portray for 18th and 19th century education.
So it's a big question. First of all, I'd like to preface the fact that I came across Beautiful Tree perhaps 25 years, more than 20 years ago for sure. And I was privileged to meet Dharampalji twice in Coimbatore, and I had long discussions with him. So I've been not a very close or faithful follower, but I've been trying to imbibe as much as I could from him, and have immense respect for his accomplishments. The question you ask is difficult because there are certain things which are obvious, especially the teacher-student relation. In the pre-colonial school system, if we may call it that, not just school, by the way, because Beautiful Tree also covers a lot of higher education institutions. The British reports mention them as higher education institutions, and we find that usually they're very small. They're not huge university. There's only one or two in Bengal, which still is, I think, Sahana will know, but there was perhaps the Nudha University, which was still surviving in the lineage, if I may say so, of Nalanda till the 18th century. But otherwise, it's all fairly small scale, decentralized systems, and very economical. Several British officials marvel at the economy of the whole system. So there's a kind of a frugality. There is a bonding between the teacher and the student, which we can certainly learn from and have to reintegrate. There is also the fact, which is very interesting, that, and this is something that I forgot to mention, it is called peer learning. And peer learning, which means students teaching students, is something extremely important, which the NEP would like to try to promote. It has been tried in schools 1 to 5 in Tamil Nadu under the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan some years ago, where they had a completely activity-based learning for all government schools in Tamil Nadu, classes 1 to 5. And for each topic, there would be one room with all the activity tools. There would be one room for reading, writing. There would be one room for geography. There would be one room for mathematics. Different rooms with different tools and activities. But all the students of classes 1 to 5 would sit together. And this is something that happened in the pre-colonial schools, and it is so important because there is no better student than another student. I'm so sorry, and there is no better teacher than another student. All right? There is a kind of very, very organic phenomenon happening. And it was the case in the pre-colonial schools, and we have to try to catch that back. Now, apart from that, I do not see how the whole system can be copied verbatim. We have to adapt it because the numbers have multiplied so much. So we were talking at that time of maybe 250 million inhabitants in India. We're now talking about 5 times that number. So therefore, the logistical problems are very, very different. We have to acknowledge that. And also, in those days, in a school in Tamil Nadu, you would have only Tamil children. Now today, in a school in Tamil Nadu, if you take a city like Coimbatore, near which I lived for years, you'll have Tamil students, you'll have Andhra students, you'll have Malayalam students, you'll have Sikh students, you'll have Gujarati students, you'll have all of that. Therefore, the question of language becomes a bit complex. So therefore, the conditions have changed, and that, of course, we recognize. Nevertheless, as I said, there are very core principles that we can very much draw inspiration from.
Oh, yes. So you think that there's always a tension between centralization and decentralization aspect here, because the old model that we had was always stressing on decentralization, whether it's about gathering resources or emphasizing on local history or education system, keeping regional content in mind and all that. But when we are moving towards the bigger structure, of course the centralization aspect get more emphasis, like a standardization, uniformization. How you think it could be balanced, or NEP is trying to balance that? I think regional content is emphasized there, and regional languages are also emphasized there.
You're right. So regional languages, I did mention briefly. I see, in fact, in the chat box, a question about several languages. Yes, the NEP acknowledges multilingualism of India, which we all know, and the fact also that Indian children are particularly good at picking up languages fairly easily. And therefore, there's no reason to restrict school children to 2 or even 3 languages. There could be organic ways in which more languages could be acquired, because that's, I've seen even illiterate Indians speaking fluently 4 or 5 languages. Illiterate, they never went to school, but they had the languages. So this is, yes, absolutely one factor. Then, as you said, and this is a very important thing, starting from the local as much as possible. In certain fields like mathematics, it may not be very, very relevant, but in other fields like geography, like history, like culture, we can absolutely get this child to start from what is just around. So I have personally been promoting a complete reversal of topics of geography and history, where you really start from your town and your district, and then you keep enlarging it. In the current textbooks of geography, it's the other way around. You start from Africa, you start from Antarctica, which means nothing for the child, nothing. So there is therefore a big reversal to gently again promote. But then you see the central issue here, if you speak of decentralization, is going to be the exams. Because if it's CBSE, well, the exam system is set from Delhi. If it is state board, it will be set from the state capital, and therefore schools have, so far have been aligning themselves, and therefore there's a tremendous amount of standardization. So how do we put in an element that takes into account the child's natural progression? So there has to be some continuous evaluation system. CBSE try to introduce the concept. It's difficult to make it work. Because of the privatization and commercialization of school education. And therefore, we know that private schools are going to cheat, and they're going to give good marks. If we take into account internal marks, they're going to give top marks to all students. And therefore, it doesn't work. So therefore, we need to think quite hard about the whole logistics here. And but that is the goal ultimately, yes, that the child's progress is evaluated in many ways, not through a centralized exam just, but also not directly from the teacher alone either. So this is something we have to work out.
Right. Thank you indeed for this insight. Before I hand over to Sahana ji, because she has been waiting for her questions to be asked, last question, Michel ji. Because implementation of IKS, Indian knowledge system, is very important to bring indigenous knowledge system in mainstream academia. So what specific advice you can give to teachers or faculty, because we don't have any degree in IKS as such, any MA course, or so where they could begin learning about IKS and in a small step could integrate IKS wherever they are.
So I'll try to be brief. That's another huge question. It's going to take years, to work on all these. But the point here is that if we want to teach IKS alone, well, we have some tools. For example, we have the CBSE course, which Professor Kapil Kapoor, myself, and others piloted. And then we have two beautiful textbooks on knowledge, traditions, and practices of India. The course is still alive, though there are important issues which have prevented it from picking up as much as we like. Hopefully, the NEP will promote this. So there is already some material which any forward-looking school could use to initiate a course on IKS. And if they find better material elsewhere, very well, that is fine. But it should be very authentic. And we insisted on authenticity because there's a lot of dubious material here and there, mixed, good things mixed with indefensible, claims and so on. Now, the point is that all this is still looking at IKS as a separate field and separate discipline. And this is only a temporary solution. I have been advocating for years, and now again in our group, in our National Steering Committee, I'm advocating that the ultimate solution is not to teach IKS separately, but to integrate the parts of IKS in all disciplines. In mathematics, very easy, you would because, half of what students of mathematics learn till class 10 was worked out in a classical Indian mathematics. It's very easy to introduce those step by step. I don't want to take time going into details. I could, but I will avoid. And similarly, you can introduce elements of water management whenever you speak of the environment. You can introduce elements of martial arts in physical education and so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of a mapping to be done. We've kind of done it when we were proposing to schools this KTPI course. And with this mapping, the duty of the duty, the hope that the teacher, progressive teacher, is that he will or she will get acquainted with this IKS knowledge. First of all, because teachers are currently extremely ignorant, and therefore it's not going to work because they can't teach KTPI as it is today, and they will not be able to do this work of integration. So we will help them. We will be proposing how in each discipline this chunk of knowledge can be integrated, can be added. All right. If there's something still called value education, I don't know whether there still be. We can bring in genuine Indian ethics. There's a module on Indian ethics in the KTPI course. So instead of teaching it as a separate topic, if we can, integrate as much as possible in all the disciplines, this traditional Indian system, sometimes just at least as an introductory chapter, but sometimes at different points in the development of the topic. It all depends. That's my brief answer.
So like customizing IKS as per the needs of respective institutions would be best way to move ahead on this.
Yes, absolutely. And I see that you have posted a module, but the two complete volumes, no, I've not yet put them, but I'll put them on my academia page. The two complete volumes of the CBSE KTPI course. They are copyrighted with CBSE, but they can be used for any non-commercial purpose. If it and a lot of private schools, incidentally, have used this textbook very happily, or parts of it, and we've told them, go ahead, as long as you don't use this commercially in any way, it's fine.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Michel ji, for answering my queries. Now I request Sahana ji to please move with her questions. And
thank you.
Sahana ji, it's over to you now.
Thank you so much. And I've been waiting for this opportunity to interact with Michel ji. I actually went to meet Dr. Kasturi Rangan in Bangalore, and I gave him my book, and he said I should contact you and be talking to you. So before, and I was wondering how to get in touch with you. And meanwhile, this thing happened. So I'm happy. The universe is wanting us to talk. One of the things that I have been thinking about a lot is how to ensure that Indian students have a sense of civilizational pride. I mean, I'm not saying that, say that we were the greatest in everything, but to have that sense of pride, because living in America, I have met a number of very disconnected Indians who simply, they have that sense of loathing towards their culture and everything that's Indian. And so that's something that bothers me a lot. And I was wondering, and in the NEP, it mentions that the new system should bring in a sense of pride. So I wanted to know what ideas you have in this regard. Is it going to be just talking about the IKS, which is going to bring that pride, or are there any other strategies? And there's one more thing that I want to do. I put all my thoughts together. So some years back, I was part of a team that was looking at the textbooks for class 6 to 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in Telangana. So we were looking at all the textbooks they have, social studies, and we were giving them inputs for making changes. And frankly, there were so many changes we wanted that we literally wanted them to have new textbooks. But anyway, one of the things that I remember pointing out was in the section on the seasons, the climate of India. And it just mentioned that there are 4 seasons: summer, winter, spring, and autumn. So I said, I wrote to them saying that please mention that we have 6 seasons in our culture. Give the names, Vasant, Grishma, Varsha, Sharad, Hemant. All these names should be known to the students. And for God's sake, don't put pictures of fall in America. So it had pictures of all the seasons in America, nothing of the local pictures of Telangana. So, and there are many other instances of a very Eurocentric worldview. So, we can see the evidence of a colonized mindset everywhere, the teachers as well. So I want to know what kind of, in your current role, what kind of frameworks have you developed for decolonizing the curriculum?
I think, Sahanaji, your 2 questions are actually one and the same. Because if you do number 1, then you've taken care of number 2. Yes, there's still a lot of decolonizing to do. And as I said, the worst part for me is that we implicitly convince the student that since there is nothing of Indian content, therefore there's nothing that India has to teach. It all has to come from the West. And of course, students have to be exposed to knowledge from the West. It's not about cutting off anything, but except that we have to lighten this curriculum drastically. But we have to integrate intelligently a lot of Indian content. About the sense of pride, yes, the NEP mentions that we have to make Indian students rooted and proud of being Indians. But you see, if you just say that to a student, you have to be proud of being Indian. It doesn't work. They'll be proud during a cricket match, perhaps, or some, Bollywood film, or I don't know, but it doesn't work. It's really through imbibing the knowledge in a living way, not in a academic. You can't teach Indian knowledge systems to students of class 5, 6, 7, in a scholastic manner. You have to do it in a living way. You have to take them out to agriculture in a village and then show the problems. What happens with the chemical-based agriculture, or find some organic farmer and see how it's happening. You have to take them to some heritage sites. You have to take them to monuments. You have to. I've seen very, very innovative teachers who made students, research a city in depth for 6 months before taking them to this city. And then it was a completely different understanding of how that historical city had behaved through the centuries. But they had researched it for 6 months. That produced a beautiful colored, the whole class, not the teacher. All the students had produced. It was Surat in Gujarat. And this was done from Jalgaon, Geetaji, if you are listening. This was done from the Anubhuti school, where my old friend Krishna Kumar piloted this project. And for 6 months, they researched Surat, all the historical development. And they produced a very nice little book out of this, and then they went to visit Surat. So it's a very, intelligent way of getting students to participate and to make them research something, let them take up a text, discuss it, let them translate Panchatantra stories from Hindi to Telugu, or whatever. And there are so many ways that we've just been blind to, because we've been thinking so narrowly about education. So therefore, I feel that the best way to instill a sense of pride is not to try, and rather to make them, absorb, soak in as much. Children are sponges. Make them absorb this tremendous wealth of knowledge, of ethical values, of inspiring stories. India is such a treasure house of stories. And those stories are among the very best educational tool, and we've never even used it. You see? So make them, let them pick up, even with my own students, IIT Gandhinagar, undergraduate, postgraduate students. Sometimes I've made them, get back to me with one agricultural harvest festival from their region. Each of you get me one festival from your region, and suddenly they start looking. So the teacher doesn't have to do much. And, if I may say, ironically, Sri Aurobindo wrote a very brilliant article on 3 principles of education when he was still in the freedom movement in the first decade of the 20th century. And the first he said was, the first principle of education is that nothing can be taught. And then he develops. He says, he explains why. It's a brilliant article. I can send it to Ram, and Ram, you can share it with. So nothing can be taught. And therefore, I take it that I, as a teacher, I should have nothing to do. I don't want to do any work, in fact, ideally. Unfortunately, I still have to work. The system forces me to work, which is very unfortunate. But ideally, the teacher should do as little as possible. And you just throw ideas, throw material, look at this, look at that. Why don't you research this? Why don't you bring material from there? Why don't you go to your community and let us know how do they, view this tradition? How do they interact among themselves or whatever? So this is the key to me, where you will really, and I see that Ram is very prompt and has already posted these 3 principles of true teaching. It's an inspiring text, this is, to me, the key. If you do that, you automatically decolonize. And of course, we have to remove those very silly right from kindergarten. Many schools are teaching lullabies, which are British lullabies, when we have such a wealth of lullabies in India. And I've met people who are actually trying to reintegrate Indian lullabies at kindergarten. So yes, this decolonizing has to be done, but it's not enough. You can't just remove things. You have to now really drive in what is precious, worth preserving in India's heritage. That's my answer to you.
Professor, will there be a compendium of methods that will be given to the teachers, like you can try this or try this? I mean, how will they?
Of course we will. That is why our National Steering Committee, one of the 4 frameworks we have to design is for teacher training. Because if we don't do that, the whole thing is going to fade. We have to infuse a new spirit in them. We have to tell them that, look, you've not been teaching all this time. You've just been, machines yourself in a bigger machines. In a bigger machine, you've been small, wheels in that machine. So that's not education. And I think we will get their collaboration, because from limited attempts, I've seen innovative schools here and there. Because what I've been describing is the kind of average school in India. But there have been schools trying to innovate, trying to take as much possibility of freedom the system gave them to break away, to at least in the lower classes, from this oppressive system. So there have been already a number of attempts, and we can draw inspiration from them. And yes, we'll try to guide the teachers towards that.
Sanaji, any more questions?
I thought it was 4:30. That's why I thought that I
can understand, because they cannot be last question when Michel Danino is sitting in front.
Yeah. Is there time for more questions?
I am just opening it for audience. If they have any question, we can take from them. Otherwise, we'll take 5 more minutes if Michel ji permits. Okay, one from Sujata ji, I think you're saying. Okay.
How does one train teachers and parents? Should we involve the parents?
I saw the question, yeah, somewhere above in the
Yes.
chat about parents. So teachers have kind of answered, I hope. It's a very big challenge. They have to be taken on board. They have to be convinced that now it's a new thing altogether, and they will have to change the whole, mindset with which they approach schooling and higher education. Parents also are primarily concerned with jobs. And this is a major stumbling block, and they have to be taken on board. So the Ministry of Education has initiated a series of meetings, of course, with limited audiences at first, but with parents. I myself piloted in 2007 a workshop with parents where we came out with a set of recommendations, which we sent to NCERT at the time. Yes, they have to be convinced that, you see, and that's the bottom line in a way, if you make your children happier, more fulfilled, they will be better citizens. And don't worry, they will find a job. Right now, what you're doing, we're training your children for the first job. You're not even training them for the second job. You're not training them for the third job. And most importantly, you're not training them to meet the challenges of life. And we see a large number of young Indians who stumble at the first little pebble on their path. The first little challenge, and they fall into depression. They go haywire, they drop everything, or they commit suicide, or whatever. And we find a lot of failures because they are absolutely not prepared for life. So if you have happy, fulfilled, much more knowledgeable students, they will be equipped to face the challenges of life. And that's what any concerned parent should want at the end. So there's a big line of effort that has to be initiated there, series of workshops, manuals produced, and all kinds of social media and other communications with parents will have to be. It's another whole field to explore and work on, and I quite agree. I see a question. Ram, can I take it?
Yes, please.
How best can we localize the learning system rooted into local history, culture, and customs with due concerns for sustainable livelihood? So local history is something that has to be taken up. If the topic of history still remains, we'll have to see in what form it remains. But if it remains like this, I've been advocating the fact that you don't need to start from prehistory. You don't need to start from the Harappan civilization. You don't need to start from Ashoka. You can start with the local ruler in the nearby fort and figure out who he was and do some research, and then climb back, and okay, at some point, yes, you can jump back into the beginnings and see. But first of all, get them concerned and interested in what history is about. Otherwise, it's all abstract and meaningless. And, I've heard many school students telling me that for us, history is a sleeping pill. We just sleep during the history class. So therefore, there's been a massive failure there. And I think local history is one way to change the whole purpose, plus the whole different pedagogical approach. Sustainable livelihood is, I'm not sure I have understood the connection, but if you say that the local culture and customs can show examples of sustainable livelihood, yes, absolutely. India has always promoted frugal living, not ascetic living, but frugal, with some of the rulers being allowed to wallow in wealth and luxury, but for the general population, it would be very definitely a sustainable style of living from which we can draw inspiration, especially when we now have to challenge the world over issues of over-consumerism and the whole flawed economic system that Ernst Schumacher in the 1970s highlighted when he spoke of Buddhist economics, which to him meant reintegrating the human being at the center of economics and displacing consumerism. He said we've made the fatal error of putting consumption at the center of economics. We must move consumption to the periphery and put the human being at the center. And therefore, he was one of the early advocates against this cult of consumerism that has become the foundation of our economic system, and which is totally unsustainable. And therefore, yes, we can draw here from regional, local culture and examples of livelihood. And I'm here sitting in Auroville, where there's a sustainable livelihood institute, and Geetaji, you are in touch with Ramasubramaniam, who is also a disciple and follower of Dharampalji, and where they show the villagers, how sustainability is part of their lifestyle and needs to be preserved. So certainly we have a lot of inspiration to draw from. Geetaji, to what extent can Gandhi's Nai Talim be a source of inspiration? I'm not familiar with it enough to answer. I only know that Gandhi's philosophy drawn from village lifestyle has, and not only lifestyle, but putting the village as a central unit in the future economic system of India. I think that there was a lot of wisdom in it, though I'm, as you know, I'm a critic of Gandhi at other levels, especially the freedom movement. But as far as his social vision is concerned, I'm much in tune with it. There is a lot of that needs to be readapted, of course, to today's conditions, which are very, very different from what was prevalent in his days. But certainly his ecological vision in particular, which is something we can draw inspiration from. Minus perhaps his tendency to promote asceticism, ascetic living, which is simply not going to work. It can work, of course, for a minority of people who are drawn to it, but not for the mass of the population, in my humble opinion. So this is a brief answer to this question. And finally, I think I'll take this last question, if you permit, since I have another meeting very shortly coming up. Shikha asks, do you feel that the NEP will be a helpful tool to incorporate the indigenous communities and bring them in the mainstream as well? Yes, this is mentioned. What is called, and I'm indigenous, whether indigenous is a proper term, whether tribal is a proper term, we can endlessly debate these terms. Let's not waste time on this. We know what we mean. And yes, these ancient communities have a lot of teaching to give us, especially as far as the bonding with nature is concerned. And bonding with nature is something that was at the core of Buddhist philosophy, Jain philosophy, Hindu philosophy. So we have to rediscover that. We have to heal our wounded relationship with nature. Unless we do that, we're not going to, scientific knowledge of environmental sciences is very good and very desirable, but it won't be enough for us to change our behavior, our lifestyle. So therefore, this is one of the main important contributions. And the NEP does speak of learning from these communities, and we will, tradition and knowledge systems there has to be part of it. Finally, the question I think is the last question from Kaushiki is too big for me to address. It's about basically the privatization and commercialization of school education, which I have briefly alluded to. Yes, there is inequality. So the NEP has tried to give thought to this, how to bring in equity and inclusiveness to school education. It's a very, very big challenge. There's so much of disparity in our Indian society. This is going to take a lot of work, a lot of thinking, and we have to convince, the more advantaged sections and school to open their doors, to be more generous to the more disadvantaged students, and and communities. This is going to be a long drawn effort. I would simply recommend that you read in the NEP document, you read the part that concerns this importance given to inclusiveness, because we do have to move forward towards it. So these are all the big issues that our National Steering Committee is trying to address. I think we will achieve something, but let's not be under any illusion. It's going to take years. What matters to me most, and I would like to conclude with this if you permit, is to initiate a change of tack, a change of direction. We've been on the wrong road. At least if everybody is convinced that now there is a new road in front of us, let's move towards it. So, once you initiate some dynamics, then things can follow, and everybody has to be on board. The state educational boards have to be on board, the parents have to be on board, the teachers have to be on board. It's an enormous task. It should have been started on 16th of August 1947, the day after independence, was the right day to start rethinking education. That's what most of the freedom fighters had called for. That's what Vivekananda had called for. That's what Sri Aurobindo had called for. That's what Gandhi also had called for. All of them, they wanted that free India should, have its own educational system, and it didn't happen. So fine, let's see what we can do today, and let's all put in our effort towards this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michel. Thank you a lot for giving your wonderful insights.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geetaji. Thank you. I'll take my leave with your permission.
Yes, sir, please. With heavy heart. We cannot ask you to leave because the list of questions are endless with you. And we will catch you soon with other round of discussion on NEP.
I'm hard to catch, but you can keep trying.
Thank you, Michel.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.